October 1907. America's financial system was collapsing. Banks were failing. Panic was spreading, and the U.S. Treasury was helpless. So the most powerful man in America did something extraordinary. He locked every major banker in his library, refused to let them leave, and told them they would solve this crisis together, or the entire system would burn. That man was J.P. Morgan, and his personal fortune was bigger than the federal government's reserves. Welcome back to Past to Profit, where history meets money. J.P. Morgan didn't just build wealth, he built American capitalism itself. He owned the railroads, controlled the steel industry, financed electricity, and when the government couldn't save the economy, twice, Morgan did it himself with his own money. This is the story of how one man became more powerful than the United States government. John Pierpont Morgan was born in 1837 in Hartford, Connecticut, into a wealthy merchant banking family. His grandfather was a founder of Aetna Insurance, and his father, Junius Morgan, had moved to London to run a merchant bank. Young Morgan grew up surrounded by finance, learning the business from childhood, and by his 20s he was already working in his father's banking operations. But Morgan wasn't interested in just being another banker. He saw something bigger. America after the Civil War was chaotic, filled with small competing businesses, inefficient railroads, and financial instability. Morgan believed in organization, in consolidation, in creating massive, efficient systems. Where others saw competition, Morgan saw waste. His first major move came in the 1870s with railroads. America had dozens of competing railroad companies, each building overlapping lines, cutting each other's prices, and going bankrupt regularly. It was financial chaos. Morgan stepped in and started consolidating them. He bought failing railroads, merged them with stronger ones, reorganized their finances, and created profitable monopolies. He didn't just lend money, he took control, restructured everything, and built empires. By the 1880s, Morgan controlled more railroad mileage than anyone in America. But that was just the beginning. In 1895, the United States government faced a crisis so severe it almost destroyed the dollar. The Treasury was running out of gold, the currency was collapsing, and European investors were pulling their money out of America. President Grover Cleveland had no solution, Congress wouldn't help, and the country was weeks away from defaulting on its debts. So Cleveland did something unprecedented. He called J.P. Morgan to Washington. Morgan arrived with a plan. He would personally arrange a loan to the U.S. government, buying $62 million in gold bonds and rallying European investors to stabilize the dollar. It worked. Morgan and his partners stopped the panic, restored confidence in the dollar, and saved the government from collapse. But here's the important part. Morgan didn't do this out of patriotism alone. He made a profit, a significant one. And more importantly, he proved something to the world. The U.S. government needed him more than he needed them. His personal financial power exceeded that of the federal treasury. That's not just wealth, that's empire-level influence. After saving the government, Morgan's power only grew. In 1901, he orchestrated the largest business deal in history up to that point. He bought Andrew Carnegie's steel empire for $480 million equivalent to over $150 billion in today's money, and merged it with other steel companies to create U.S. Steel, the first billion-dollar corporation in history. Morgan now controlled steel production, the railroads that transported it, and through his banking operations, the financing that made it all possible. He didn't just participate in industries, he owned entire sectors of the economy. Electricity? He financed Thomas Edison and controlled General Electric. Shipping? He owned International Mercantile Marine, which included the White Star Line that built the Titanic. Banking? His firm financed everything. At his peak, Morgan's companies employed hundreds of thousands of workers and represented over 40% of American industrial output. One man, one financial empire, controlling nearly half of America's economy. No individual before or since has wielded that level of economic power in the United States. Then came 1907, and Morgan faced his greatest test. A financial panic started when a group of speculators tried to corner the copper market and failed spectacularly. Their failure triggered a run on banks, and within days, trust companies across New York were collapsing. People lined up to withdraw their money. Banks didn't have enough cash, and the entire financial system was freezing. The federal government had no central bank, no Federal Reserve, and President Theodore Roosevelt had no tools to stop the panic. Once again, they turned to J.P. Morgan. At 70 years old, Morgan became the de facto central bank of America. He organized meetings at his mansion and his library, brought together the heads of every major bank, and started directing the rescue personally. Morgan assessed which banks were sound and which were doomed. He organized pools of money to prop up the salvageable institutions and let the others fail. He bullied, threatened, and persuaded bankers to cooperate. And on one critical night when the presidents of major trust companies couldn't agree on a rescue plan, Morgan locked them in his library, refused to let anyone leave, and told them they would sign an agreement or face collective ruin. At 3 a.m, exhausted and cornered, they signed. Morgan had single-handedly stopped the panic. The stock market stabilized, the bank runs ended, and the financial system survived. For the second time in 12 years, one man had saved America's economy. But this time, people started asking uncomfortable questions. If one private citizen had more power than the government, was that healthy for democracy? If J.P. Morgan controlled the money supply, who controlled J.P. Morgan? The Panic of 1907 proved that America needed a central bank, a public institution that could do what Morgan had done privately. In 1913, just months after Morgan's death, Congress created the Federal Reserve System. It was designed specifically to prevent any individual from ever wielding Morgan's level of financial power again. The Morgan era ended, but his legacy shaped American finance forever. When Morgan died in 1913, his estate was valued at around $80 million, equivalent to about $2 billion today. People were shocked. They expected much more. Rockefeller was worth over $300 million at the time. But here's what they missed. Morgan's real power wasn't his personal wealth, it was his control. He didn't need to own everything himself. He controlled access to capital, and that gave him leverage over everyone else. Rockefeller owned oil. Carnegie owned steel. But Morgan owned the system that financed both of them. He decided who got funding, which mergers happened, which industries expanded. That's a different kind of power, more subtle but far more influential. Today, J.P. Morgan Chase is one of the largest banks in the world, a direct descendant of his original firm, managing trillions in assets and serving as a cornerstone of global finance. Morgan's vision of organized, consolidated, efficient capitalism became the standard. His belief that stability required concentration of power shaped how modern financial systems operate. So what's the lesson from J.P. Morgan's story? He understood something fundamental about wealth and power. It's not about having the most money, it's about controlling the flow of money. Morgan positioned himself as the gatekeeper, the coordinator, the essential link in every major transaction. When crisis came, everyone needed him because he controlled the infrastructure. In today's terms, he wasn't just rich, he was systematically important. And that gave him influence no amount of personal wealth alone could match. True power isn't just what you own, it's what you control and what others depend on you for. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers, and on Path to Profit, we'll show you where to look.